Welcome to Homestead Reptile. Today with me is little Rhubarb, and I want to discuss the subject of bigger is always better. Give your pet the largest enclosure you can possibly give it. They will always do better in a larger enclosure than a smaller enclosure. So I'm here to say that is somewhat true, but not all the time. So your average animal is generally, well, we'll talk about crested geckos. Most crested geckos do like a larger enclosure, but there are a small group that are not cool with it. They just stress out for whatever reason. You can make the enclosure perfect. They have the right amount of branches. They have vertical, sideways, different widths of branches, different textures of branches. You can clutter the tank with a ton of foliage. They feel like it's at home. They can hide in a dozen different spots. You can do everything. And sometimes that gecko just does not do well. And it's not your fault. It's just that gecko preferred that smaller original enclosure. And Rhubarb is an example of this. So Rhubarb was living in well, she's back in there now. So the dimensions of this tank she is in now is a 20 by 13 by 12. So it's not a super small enclosure, but it's not the best size enclosure for a more mature crested gecko. Now, she's not fully grown. Before I took her out of that smaller enclosure, she weighed 33 grams. When I took her out and moved her into the big enclosure, and that big enclosure is a 18 by 18 by 24. Yeah, that's what's the size of this enclosure. So when I moved her to that bigger enclosure, she wasn't eating as well. She just seemed more stressed out. She didn't want to take bugs, and she was just agitated. So the first week is like, they have to adapt. That some geckos take longer to adapt. But the second week, the third week, and I weigh her, it's like, she visibly has lost some weight. She didn't lose a ton of weight, so now she is 29 grams. So she lost a few grams, and I can tell she has lost a decent amount of weight. Her backbone is a little spiky, and her crests aren't as big. She's just lost a little bit of weight, and I'll show you her older pictures to what she looks like today. So I made the decision to move her back into her smaller enclosure. She's eating again. Her behavior is a lot more normal. She's settled down, and she might just be a gecko that's forever going to live in the juvenile rack or the juvenile setup, because she just doesn't like the adult setup. So at 33 grams, generally you're safe to move them up to a full-sized enclosure. But Rhubarb just wasn't that gecko. And it happens. Sometimes they just don't like the bigger enclosure. And I prefer bigger enclosures because I can do so much more fun stuff with it. Add a lot more natural elements to it. Add larger plants that vine up and do some crazy fun stuff. I enjoy making big enclosures, but sometimes they just don't like them and they want to go back into their smaller, more familiar enclosure. And as a pet keeper, you have to do the best for your pet. So sometimes bigger is not always better in this case. I can also say with certain age groups of geckos as well, I would never put a new hatchling into an adult size enclosure. That's asking for it to die. Now, you might say, the wild, they have endless amounts of space. Yeah, in the wild, they have endless amounts of space, but in the wild, they are mostly going to be eaten, dry up, and die. So as pet people, we don't like to let our pets dry up and die. So you can see the difference between how much weight she has in the past and how much she weighs now. You can really see the weight difference in the hips. She's just not as robust. Now, she's, like I said, immediately she was eating again. She's doing better, and I think she's going to probably be a permanent resident in that enclosure. So I think I will spruce it up because it has living plants in there, but I scattered it with fake plants because it's a juvenile grow out. So I just throw random plants in there and I don't really think about it as long as it's well covered. It's kind of an eyesore to me. It's kind of like an enclosure, but it functions for the gecko. So I'm planning to probably spruce it up and add some more plants, do some more stuff with the juvenile enclosures. So this little girl right here, this is Oolong. So Oolong actually weighed quite a bit less than Rhubarb. But Oolong has been staying in a smaller enclosure. So you can see what a healthy gecko weight should look like. You see how plump Oolong is? Very plump. You can see the hips aren't showing at all. And she doesn't have that massive amount of divot right there. So you can definitely see she has lost some weight because Oolong actually weighs a little bit less than her. She needs to put her weight back on. And again, she'll be eating feeder insects again. She is eating feeder insects again. And I'm just adding a little bit of extra to her food to plump her back up. But this is just a case of did not like the larger enclosure. Got stressed out, didn't eat, and stressed animals lose weight, and when they don't eat, they lose weight. So she is going to be in a smaller enclosure. Probably I can try again to move her to a bigger enclosure, but now I'm kind of like a little nervous to do it because I don't like this weight drop. It's not healthy. It's not normal. So I think to be safe, I'm going to keep her in this size enclosure. Maybe I can try something, maybe a tad bigger, but not by much. I could try something maybe a little bigger, but I will just have to wait and see. And again, sometimes a larger enclosure is not always better. I have a few others that just don't do well in larger enclosures. I don't know why. I have a lily white that just does not like large enclosures. That's grotesque. Does not like it. I have a breeding size male that does not like larger enclosures. He likes that smaller enclosure, and it's just better for him. I have a few that are like that just don't like the larger enclosure. They drop weight. They stress out. I've only had it happen to 3 geckos out of my entire collection. So most geckos do well in the bigger enclosures, but those 3 just do not. And again, it's personality. I don't know what's going on with that. But again, like and subscribe and tell me what you think.